Good evening and welcome to Loaded Mag, a special quick edition with our good friend Ben Jacobs, who I will bring on very shortly. We're going to have a bit of a chat, obviously, about the appointment of Eddie Howe today. Obviously, it's kind of been dragging on from the weekend. Rumour is it that Chanley lost his pen in a Toby Carvery somewhere in Newcastle and couldn't get the deal signed pre the Brighton game. But that's all done now. So we're going to get Ben to come on, have a bit of a chat. Talk to us about where Newcastle are at now, obviously kind of post-takeover. Howe's appointment. We're going to talk a little bit about the news of possibly Michael Imanolo as Director of Football. Seems to be doing the rounds there this evening. There is a bit of chat regarding PIF and them trying to do something with Inter. So Ben is kind of on the top of that. So he's going to give us a bit of an update. He is in a hotel whilst traveling and has got a bit of an iffy broadband connection. So if he does drop in and out, we do apologize ahead. But look, let's bring him on and we'll get going. Ben, good evening.
Good evening. I like that you started by saying it was a quick edition, which is very unlikely given that the guest you've chosen is me, but it's great to be back on.
I know. I only really need one question because that does cover the hour, but I've gone with three on the fact that it's only the two of us this evening. And to be fair, we're both good talkers. So let's see where we get to. So a while since we've spoken, we've had you on. I think this is the fifth time now. I think that must be quite a record now. We've obviously spoke pre-takeover a load, lots going on. We've since had the takeover. So how have you seen things since takeover, post-takeover? How do you think the new owners are faring? How do you think they are settling in? Obviously, we kind of said pre-coming on a little bit, I suppose, of naivety, possibly with the whole Unai Emery piece. But in your view, in the, I suppose, the sports circles and journalism circles, what's the word out there on the street? How do you think that the likes of Amanda and Maydad and the Rubens and so on are settling into life at Newcastle United?
I think the strange thing is that we are hearing and seeing from 10% of the ownership group predominantly. So Amanda Staveley has been the prominent face and voice and has guided the strategy from both a strategic perspective, a football perspective, and a PR one as well. And actually, what we want to know more of is the 80% ownership group, in other words, PIF and Yasser Al-Rumayyan. And the Rubens are 10%, and again, haven't been that prominent. We haven't seen them speak to the media, but what we understand about them is that they come with more of a football knowledge and very clear ties with not just Newcastle United Football Club now, but the community and city at large. So what worries me a little bit is that the fragmentation of the two minority parts of the football club and the majority part has, as I understand it, become apparent very early. And we are seeing a lot of in-house conversations and some might say disputes between what direction the football club should be taken. And we can kind of come on to that in a bit. However, I feel sorry for the ownership group as well, because they're under so much scrutiny that every owner coming into a football club needs time to bed in, needs time to understand what they're working with on and off the football field. Because all you do when you buy a football club is due diligence around the business, but you don't actually know the level of talent and staff in every aspect of the club. You're not going to really be that aware of who's the communications manager, what's he like, how did the digital team operate, how many cleaners do we have, who works in the canteen. And every person at a football club is just as important. And it takes time to understand what they need, how they'd like to develop, how they can work together in a more unified way. And I genuinely mean that in every single level of the football club. So they need to come in and know everybody from the manager to the cleaner, from the chef to the kit man, and then, of course, the fans and the wider community. And that will take time. And if every step they make and every decision that they choose is scrutinized, it will appear more of a rougher transition than it is in reality. And I remember when GFH from the Middle East took over Leeds United, I remember the Middle East takeover of Nottingham Forest as well, which I was very close to. And again, both of them came with a lot of fanfare, a lot of PR, and then a fair few wobbles before they really found their feet. And to be honest, at Leeds United, they never found their feet, and it was a complete disaster. But at Newcastle United, I think the big thing is just they don't want to rush, which is the correct approach. They want to make the right decisions for the football club, but they're torn strategically because there's urgent stuff that needs to be done in the short term, and then there's longer term planning. And there's not really the right name necessarily as far as the manager is concerned that ticks every box. So I understand why there will have been a number of different voices and competing strategies for how to find the next Newcastle United manager. But it's absolutely true that from day one, you had PIF, as I understand it, who wanted a box office name that could stay with Newcastle United for the long term and lead them into European football. You had the Rubins, who preferred originally Frank Lampard and felt that the most important thing was to find a name that had Premier League experience. And then you had Amanda Staveley, who originally wanted Fonseca. And before all of that, everyone had kind of agreed on Brendan Rodgers, but he dismissed them without even really talking to them, not directly anyway. So then they were forced to look at other names. So I think that my impression is that they've not necessarily had a backup plan for the manager. So therefore, they found themselves interviewing a variety of candidates, and there was a variety of internal opinions. And the reason I say that is because even though I think Eddie Howe is an excellent appointment, look at who the final two were. You had Unai Emery and Eddie Howe. They couldn't be more different in terms of their demeanour, their style, their tactics, their system. Sure, both Premier League experience, but that's about all they've got in common. Emery is more defensive-minded. He plays shorter passes. He plays out from the back. He plays a back three. Howe is probably going to play a 4-2-3-1 at Newcastle or a 4-3-2-1. He's more attack-minded, some would say, but then he's not really had the funds and the money and the arsenal to play to his full philosophy. But for 2 seasons in the Premier League under Bournemouth before the third season when they got relegated, they were very intrepid. They were counter-attacking. They were fast-paced. They played with a lot of width. So both of those approaches are good. But if you're down to the final two and their football philosophy is so wildly different, it does to some extent imply that they went for available names that they could get interviews with over formulating a strategy. And then the final two you'd expect to kind of play more unified into that strategy, if you see what I mean. So I think that what we're seeing maybe is just an ownership group that are learning as they go along with a lot of passion, a lot of ambition, a lot of contacts, but perhaps not as much unity as may be needed further down the line if things don't go according to plan.
Yeah, I think, obviously we kind of, myself and the lads did Load of Mag there last week, and we were saying, that the thing as per usual is, because the manager hadn't been appointed and obviously Bruce had been let go, a couple of weeks ago, very quickly across social media, you could see that, the Newcastle fan base was starting to get impatient. You had, again, you had a slight divide between people, people like myself last week on the show went, I'm not actually that worried that nothing has happened. I think, it's better that they make the right choice, whoever that manager happens to be. There's probably, I can imagine walking into the club probably was like walking into something that a hand grenade had gone off, that at all levels of the club internally, it was probably, like somebody had, turned a milkshake upside down and it was just an absolute mess. So I can just well imagine that not everything has probably been as smooth a transition as they would have wanted. And probably to take your point about, that there's probably a very, very large amount of eagerness to want to get started, hit the ground running, do really well, make those, spotlight name signings with regards to a director of football, to a coach. But I think that they probably need time, as you said, to adjust to running that and to being in the football club, how it works. And as you said, they probably need, I would imagine, to fill a multiple of positions within the club to make the club cohesive and work again, because I can only well imagine during, certainly through Ashley's time and Charlie being there, that it was probably stripped to a bare minimum. So I think they've got all of that going on in the club, and they're trying to resolve all of that and get the footballing side in. And I think probably one of the things that is most likely notable is that they're not really football people as such. So I think the appointment for me of Howe, I think, will steady the ship. But I think the director of football role is probably one of the most important roles that will go into the club, in that hopefully it is a footballing person that understands how the football side of the business needs to be run. And that kind of allows the consortium people to work on the other side, getting the club back up to a point where it's got, the right people in the right roles within the club. So I think there's probably certainly 5 or 6 key positions, I would think, within the club that need to be fulfilled to help stabilize it and run it and get it to a point. Obviously, we've got Eddie Howe, and you have been tweeting how are the lads, and I did see last night you're talking about trying to trademark it and everything else. So look, we'll let you claim it. I did see it, and to be fair to you, it was out there. I think you were the first to put it out there. And I've seen it a good while since, and obviously Newcastle put it out there today as well. So Eddie Howe, as you said, we were trying to work away with Emery. Brendan Rodgers was on that list, and it was names from Gerrard to Lampard, Fonseca, Emery. There was rumours of PIF wanted Zidane as a big marquee coach going in there. But what's Eddie Howe going to bring to Newcastle that is needed right now, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's that word, isn't it? Right now, or words. Newcastle needs somebody to come in and effectively get them out of trouble. And the challenge is that the people that can get you out of trouble are not necessarily the same people that are going to be best for you when you're out of trouble. And there's so many ways of looking at the short term, but whoever you bring in has to spark a turn of fortune, and quickly. Otherwise, it's going to set Newcastle back 2 to 5 years, in my opinion. Even if you go down to the Championship, come straight back up from the Championship, you're still probably then going to be back where you started. So it's really important that somebody with Premier League knowledge, that's the first thing Howe brings. Somebody with staying up knowledge, that's the second thing that Howe brings. And somebody who already has a sense of who's in the Newcastle squad and has worked with some of the players before. And that's the third thing that Howe brings. So none of that may appear that, for want of a better word, sexy to Newcastle United fans who might be thinking more about the name in the context of how can we jump to mid-table and beyond, and then to Europe and beyond. But actually, the director of football is the key appointment in having that lure to bring in, again, for want of a better phrase, Champions League footballers. So those sort of saying, yeah, but is Howe really going to be able to attract a box office global name like a Haaland or an Mbappe? And even those are dream names in the context of where Newcastle are now. But you can't kind of lose with Howe, in the sense that with backing and a January window, he's highly likely to keep Newcastle up. And that may feel quite deflating to certain fans, but finish 16th, 15th, 14th on 42 points this season, and feel like in the second half of the season, ironically, a bit like the second half or the last 7-8 games under Bruce last season when you stuffed Leicester and so on, feel like there's a turnaround in not just fortune, but philosophy and style. There needs to be a feel-good factor. There needs to be an affinity between the manager and the fans. There needs to be a fluid feel to the football that's balanced, and there needs to feel like there's a plan there. So when you do play well and win, it's not just kind of dumb luck. It's not just a one-off. There's actually foundational change. And that foundational change will be about what system is played, about more positive football. Even at the weekend, There was a better second half against Brighton, but it was such a flat first half. It was such a negative first half. They were in their shell. They were almost afraid to try and win the game. But Newcastle have shown constantly that they're a good counter-attacking side, even with what they've got, that they've got pace and that they can be clinical. The problems are at the back, and the problems are with the kind of philosophy of how they're being told to play, and Howe will bring that and change that overnight. And he'll get criticism because everyone thinks about what happened with Bournemouth when they went down. But let's not forget what he predominantly did at Bournemouth, which is take them up through the divisions and then make them, on a very shoestring budget, an extremely enterprising, well-organised, well-drilled attacking team. And if Newcastle are organised at the back and attacking going forwards in their philosophy, they've got far more talent already than Howe had at Bournemouth, including, of course, Callum Wilson. Add a few names, and there's no reason why they can't climb up the table. So Howe brings you everything that Newcastle United need in the short term, and the director of football will bring Newcastle everything they need in the long term. And as long as they gel, there's no reason why the future shouldn't be bright for Newcastle. The challenge will be if Howe isn't the long-term choice and gets Newcastle out of trouble, and then certain parts of the ownership group like PAF go, well, okay, now we're mid-table, we still want Zidane. And then you've got, unfortunately, a scenario where you might keep chopping and changing the manager, or there might be divisions within the football club. But these are ifs and buts and hypotheticals. And, the last thing you want to do is focus on, is it going to work in the long term, when actually he's just been appointed and it should work in the short term. So Howe brings you everything you need. And the only worry I would have is about getting too far adrift towards the foot of the table, which might sound a bit laughable to say at this stage of the season, but that is why his first few games, just because of how the calendar falls, are so vital. Because where does he start? Home to Brentford, must win. Take Arsenal out of the equation. What's next? Home to Norwich, must win. What's after that? December the 4th, home to Burnley, must win. 3 of the next 4 games, and Newcastle, for me, need a minimum of 7 points, which should get you out of the relegation zone or somewhere close, within touching distance. And then you look like you've turned a corner. But if you don't do well in those games, you then look at December. Away at Leicester, guaranteed loss by 5-0. Away at Liverpool, probable loss. Home to Manchester City, probable loss. Home to Manchester United. It depends what Manchester United team turn up, but not the favourites to win that game. Away at Everton, away at Southampton. So you could get to January the 2nd if you don't get enough points from the next 4 games, and you could be in big trouble. And that's why the manager coming in, when they were thinking about who they were going to choose, had to be someone that can hit the ground running. Because if you don't hit the ground running in November now, you could be in massive trouble because of how difficult those December fixtures are.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that obviously everything I'm seeing on Twitter, and certainly us here at Loaded HQ are acutely aware of. And I think you're right in that we need to get something out of these games. And I'm sure, even with the games in December, there'll be hopefully some kind of a freakish result where we won't be expected to get anything, and we may pick up an odd point here or there. I think, the Arsenal, probably Arsenal, 6 months ago, we would have liked to have faced, but unfortunately they seem to be picking up pace. And obviously Emile Smith-Rowe, selected for the England squad, senior squad today for the first time ever, is a player who I really, really like and seems to be on fire, which is unfortunate timing. But I think Jones needs to bring that steel to the defense, as you said. I think we've got the attacking players there, but I'm interested to get your opinion. Obviously, from the Bournemouth perspective, it is very easy for people to look at it and go, well, he got Bournemouth relegated. Well, they wouldn't have got relegated if VAR hadn't kind of did what it did and Aston Villa didn't get their call. Bournemouth wouldn't have got relegated, and you can go around in circles and keep talking about it. But from Howe's perspective, obviously, he knows some of the players in the current Newcastle squad. So he knows, obviously, Callum Wilson. He knows Matt Ritchie. He knows Ryan Fraser. But how does he manage somebody like Ryan Fraser, who there obviously seemed to be a bit of a fallout kind of at Bournemouth in those latter days? How does he, because kind of one of the things that we've found quite perplexing this season and probably into last is that Ryan Fraser just hasn't really turned up. Seems to be quite moody, quite erratic. Certainly hasn't been getting the game time, which would indicate, certainly from Bruce, and I would be interested to see is how when he comes in, is Ryan Fraser going to get game time? Personally, I think he's a very good player if he's played in the right position, but he seems to be quite moody. So I'm interested to get your view on just are these going to be some of the problem pieces that Eddie Howe is going to have to deal with in getting the likes of Ryan Fraser back? If he plays a 4-4-2, is it more game time for Dwight Gale? Does he put Joe Linton in as that second? But let's start with Fraser. I suppose first question is, what do you think is going on with Ryan Fraser? Because he doesn't seem to have kind of come alive at all. And then how does Eddie Howe pick up, those players that he had at Bournemouth and get them playing again from the way he did at Bournemouth?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And there's a few aspects to this. And, the first thing to emphasize is that the squad Howe's inheriting versus the squad that he may have in January could be completely different by 4 or 5 names. So he doesn't just have to work with what he's got, which is the challenge if you historically went into a Bournemouth or a West Brom or the new manager of Norwich and even maybe the new boss at Aston Villa. Whoever comes in knows that they're going to be backed with a mixture of permanent signings and potential loan deals, and January's not that far away. So he can go out there and get players like Tyrone Mings maybe, or a Lewis Dunk, and these would all be valuable additions in the short term for me at the back. And again, Newcastle fans will be talking about bigger names, more box office names and global names. They may come over time, but for now, get reliable Premier League players that want to elevate themselves at Newcastle United, because just joining Newcastle United is a step up for virtually every footballer in England, regardless of where a club is. I would even say if you're at West Ham United at the moment and you join Newcastle United, you're joining a bigger club. West Ham fans may disagree, but when you walk in at St James's Park, you've stepped up. And why have you stepped up? Because of the stadium, because of the fan base, because of the culture, because of the history. And that history was sort of tarnished under Mike Ashley. But let's not forget, before Ashley, the kind of club that Newcastle United were as well. And then when you add all of that to the potential under PIF, if you're a Tyrone Mings, that if you do well over 2-3 years, suddenly you're at a Champions League club or a European club, and you might not get that where you currently are. And that's where Howe and the new director of football can really wield their influence, because of the ambition of the football club and the potential that it holds, coupled with the existing fan base and to some extent the infrastructure, certainly the stadium anyway, in terms of its size and iconic nature. So then specifically with Fraser, as I understand it, Eddie Howe had met with him after their fallout and they've kind of had clear the air talks. And I think the 3 players that have worked with Howe before are really going to be quite excited because they know what he's like behind the scenes. They know what his day-to-day training is. Sometimes when people think about managers as fans, they're looking at the games and how the team's played and the performance over 90 minutes, because they're not realizing that these players are working with the manager day to day. And it's actually more about how they train and get on around the training complex rather than just what they do over 90 minutes. That's how you kind of judge the relationships. And unfortunately, Howe and Fraser did fall out. It became frosty. And sometimes when you have a temperamental character like a Fraser, it can work both ways. Their head can go down, they can not perform, they can be demotivated. But I tell you something, regardless of Howe, any Newcastle United player from day one of the Howe era that isn't motivated may as well just walk out of the club. Because if you're a professional footballer right now, what are you doing if you're not bang up from minute one? One, because you've got the investment and the excitement. And 2, because perversely, 70% of the current Newcastle United squad over the next 2 years are fighting for their place at the football club. And that's the sort of irony that if you're a fan, you see the progress. But if every fan listening now sketches down the progress of who they think they'll keep, who they'd like to replace, if you take it to the full scenario of, let's say, Champions League football or winning the league, how many would you keep in the starting lineup, regardless of their form, regardless of their talent? So every single player that wants to elevate their career to that level has to give that extra 10% and has to motivate themselves. And if Fraser doesn't do that, then just get rid of him. And I think that's what Howe will do. And then when he comes in with the rest of the squad, I think that his biggest challenge is going to be working out, in the short term at least, the best formation to play. And it's kind of catch-22 in the sense of his philosophy says attack, but he has to work with what he's got. And Newcastle's current squad screams defend. And actually, Howe's weakness has been in building defensive teams. Yeah. He hasn't kept a great amount of clean sheets. So then he's going to have to work out whether or not he persists with a philosophy that has plenty of width, counter-attacking football, fullbacks or wing-backs that get forwards, and he only maybe plays with one holding midfielder, like out-and-out holding midfielder rather than box-to-box, and then two in front of them, or whether he's going to kind of shape something more to put a band-aid over what Newcastle need in the short term. And then I think he would end up playing a 4-4-2. And in a 4-4-2, that's not necessarily his preferred style or formation. So he's got a few headaches in that respect, and we may not see the Howe philosophy until after January. So I think fans would need to be a bit patient in how they judge what he does in his first, let's say, 2 months in charge.
Yeah. Okay. One of the questions that's going to float around now is obviously about Graeme Jones. So Graeme Jones obviously made a comment in the press yesterday or this morning, I think it was, possibly, saying, he's obviously spoken to the owners, he's been assured of his position, and he's not here just to kind of bring out the training kit. Where do you see Graeme Jones fitting into Eddie Howe's staffing? Does he take a fairly senior position? Because my understanding is that the kind of Eddie's been given the go ahead to bring in his 5 kind of key staff from Bournemouth. So where do you feel that Graeme Jones fits in to Eddie Howe's team, Ben?
To be perfectly frank, I don't think he fits into Eddie Howe's team. And I think that Jones is a remnant of the Bruce era and the Ashley era. Now, I know the whole point of when he arrived very late in that era was to sort of be an anti-Bruce. And I know fans would give Jones credit when Newcastle won under Bruce last season, when they went on a run and got out of trouble. And then they would criticize it as Bruce's fault if they lost. So he's perhaps not lost the fan base in terms of their support and respect. But when you have a new ownership group and a new manager, you want a clean start. And leaving Jones in is almost about continuity and allowing somebody with hands-on experience with the players, that's respected by the players, that motivates the players and has more of a defensive and organizational background than maybe Howe, to bridge that transition. But as you say, Howe's bringing in his own people, including a defensive coach. And the last thing you want is somebody that has not only worked under the previous manager, but has been interim manager as well, with their own set of ideas, with their own favorites, with their own relationships. Those relationships in the short term can be essential and valuable, which is why I think he'll stick around. But I think that there needs to be a longer term, i.e. 2022 onwards decision as to whether there is a genuine value to Jones as either a coach or a kind of strategic consultant to the football staff, or whether actually once you've got a director of football, 5 new members of staff and a manager, he is just basically a loose part. And my feeling is that he will be a loose part and that he won't last much longer than 2022 through no real fault of his own, more through just the circumstances of Newcastle United's owners and Newcastle United's manager, even if they don't yet admit it, essentially wanting a clean break.
Yeah, I think the thing for us as fans is probably to a degree, I take your point about, the team has kind of been, defensively set up, which I suppose if you look at recent results as a Newcastle fan, you go, well, we defensively set up, but we still can't win a game. So it's not really done us any favors. But from a point of Graeme Jones, I suppose the frustration that I would have had with Graeme Jones, obviously when Steve Bruce went, was he effectively played the same kind of football as Steve Bruce did pre-departure. So as a Newcastle fan, I looked at that Chelsea game and kind of went, okay, why did he not take the shackles off? Why did he not kind of change it? And I suppose for me, I kind of look and go, okay, well, we lost the game 3-0. Okay, as per the press, we held Chelsea for 60 minutes, but that didn't really matter because we still lost 3-0. So there's part of my head is kind of going, well, why didn't we take the brakes off, and why didn't he go with a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-3-1 or wherever it happened to be, and at home against Chelsea and go for it? Okay, we may have lost 5-0 going for it, but he didn't take the shackles off. And then we get to the next game and you're kind of going, okay, now take the shackles off. Okay, I can maybe understand it for Chelsea. Bit of damage limitation, held them for 60 minutes, still lost 3-0. To be fair, 2 great goals by Reece James, one of them obviously a worldie, but never mind. But he didn't seem to, not drastically, but he didn't seem to put his plant on it. So I'm just, why do you think that didn't happen? Why did he not take the shackles off? Was it he didn't want to, didn't know how to, or was it just a kind of rinse, repeat and damage limitation?
Yeah, I think in the context of Chelsea, they are just a very, very good side. And to some extent, you do have to set up, when you're in Newcastle's position, a team against them to be more conservative. And it's sort of easy when you try that and lose the game by 3-0 to then come back and say, why didn't we have more of a go? Why weren't we more expansive? But all hell would have broken loose with the fan base if 4, 5, 6, 7 goals had gone in. And ultimately, that happened to Norwich against Chelsea, and they ended up losing their manager. And even though a manager wasn't at stake in that game because Bruce had gone and Newcastle were in a transitional period, it's still really important to kind of use games like that to try systems and approaches where you think you're best placed to get something out of the game, rather than just cave into the kind of mob calls for attack. And Newcastle, because of their philosophy and because of their history, because under Keegan they were happy to try and win or lose games 4-3, have got this desire to be the entertainers. So then, of course, when you neither entertain or get any points, you're in big, big trouble with the fan base. And I totally understand that and I empathize with that. But football is also a business. And even though teams want to entertain, Jose Mourinho has made an amazing living treating matches more strategically and tactically and stopping at 2-0 at times and not always entertaining. And it was probably only his tenure when he was at Real Madrid where, in doing that, even when he won, he really got some stick. And Newcastle fans remind me of Real Madrid fans in that respect, because both of them don't just demand a win, they demand box office entertainment. And I think that part of the problem is just the tools that, including Howe and all previous managers' disposals, it isn't just the way that both Jones and Bruce have set up teams, it is also the squad. And fans won't always want to pin it on that. And I don't necessarily mean that there's not the talent. There's 5 or 6 players there that are, I think, top 8 footballers that could walk into top 8 teams and do a job. But as a collective 11, the way that they play as a team, not individuals, they are liabilities at times. They're too prone to conceding goals. They're disorganized. They drift out of position. They lack leadership on the field. They make silly decisions at times. They lunge in. They overcommit. They don't play positive passes. There's no balance. And when you add all of that up, 5 or 6 players that have got the talent to be clinical in their moment or to take a game by the scruff of the neck aren't necessarily going to cut it against the top teams. So managers, I think, have been fearful almost because they're trying to protect the structure and the organization of their team over letting those stars let loose, because they're worried that if it doesn't work, they're going to be punished far, far too easily. And really now, what we're going to find is whether or not Bruce and Jones were right to do that because Howe's in exactly the same position, or whether a new name can change the approach. and get the results that the fans and the team so desperately need. And if Howe comes in and tries something really different, more positive, more attacking, and Newcastle get absolutely hammered in the next 4 or 5 games in doing that, then deep down, Jones and Bruce will be kind of chuckling away and saying, I told you so.
I told you so. Yeah, exactly. But I think that this was one of the things we kind of said on the show the other night. I was slightly surprised, given the change of ownership, given the fact that Bruce went, that in particular, the first half of the Brighton game, I was kind of quite old school in my thinking, which was I didn't really see any players playing out of their skins to kind of go, I want to be at this club. I've got pride in the shirt. This is my position, and I will fight tooth and nail to stay in the first 11, be part of this roller coaster as it moves on, which it inevitably will. And it may take 3 to 5 years, may take 5 to 7 years. But this club will eventually move on and will challenge, I've no doubt. But I didn't see any of our players kind of really, break out and go, okay, this isn't working on the pitch, and I do need to take it by the scruff of the neck. And I totally get your point around leadership. It's something I've been screaming out about for the last couple of seasons, but nobody's really shown that. So I'll be interested to see with Eddie Howe coming in. He's got obviously 2-week international break, so he's got a good kind of 12, 14 days to work with these players. We've obviously not got that many that are traveling or going away with international teams, possibly 1 or 2. So he should have pretty much a full squad to work with. So it will be interesting in the next game against Brentford. It will be interesting to see, do we see any Newcastle United players in that 11 make a stand and start to shine for a shirt. Now, just very quickly, just before we do move on, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Obviously, Centre Ale, who have been with us for a good while in the heart of Newcastle Central Station. Fine purveyors of ales and beers. And as we've said on multiple shows, the only Bruce in Newcastle that's still in. But secondly, and also, I suppose, to give some detail, you will see in the top right-hand corner of your screen there, 1892. So if anybody hasn't been watching the shows over the last couple of nights, firstly, you should be. So get onto it and subscribe. But 1892, we will have a guest next Friday at Bronwyn who is releasing a brand new clothing brand in Newcastle, United 1892, launching on the 1st of December by the fans and for the fans. A cool range. If you get onto 1892, you can get onto her website, you can get onto the mailing list. But Bronwyn will be on with us next Friday on Loaded Mag to tell us all about the brand, all about her launch, everything she's going to be doing. And we are absolutely delighted here on Loaded Mag that we have signed up with Bronwyn she is going to become a brand new sponsor for the channel. We're going to be doing some giveaways. She's going to be on next week. We've got a couple of bits going on with that. But make sure you join us next Friday. And as I said, all the boys here on Loaded and as a channel, we're absolutely delighted to have gone into a partnership with what will be one of the biggest and newest up-and-coming brands in Newcastle and on the internet. So get on there, join our mailing list, and when it launches in December, you will get first access to all of our online stuff. But the other thing that I must mention is that for the month of December, when Bronwyn launches United1892.com, everything that she makes profit-wise that goes from the website will go to the NUFC food bank for December. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. And she will tell us more next week when she is here. But get online and have a look at 1892, United1892.com. So
me some of that swag, by the way, because in the chat my jumper is getting absolutely hammered.
Your jumper is getting hammered. Somebody said, I think it was Chris A said, it's good to see that somebody in Guantanamo has given Ben a jumper to keep him warm in his padded wooden cell. Somebody else has asked, where is it you're at, and what is the graffiti on the back wall?
Yeah, I could move to the. In fact, if I move to the side, you'll see it's a sort of raunchy looking woman. although actually you probably don't get a clear view that way. But more importantly, if I move out of the shot, which I think everyone will be screaming for, you'll see a surprise guest behind me who is fast asleep.
Okay. I've seen this this dog before on your website. Yes.
So this is Winnie, and clearly she was the first listener that was sent to sleep within a matter of seconds of my answer, and I'm sure she's not the only one. But we have canine and humans listening into this podcast.
Well, the good thing is we've got close to 100 people watching, Ben, so you haven't sent everybody to sleep yet. Right, let's talk director of football. Obviously, Michael Emanuelo is a name that is out there this evening, seems to be getting traction. A lot of talk about him being in prime position for the director of football role. Allegedly interviewed out in Saudi with PIF. Don't know how much of that is correct, incorrect. You may know a little bit more. But what do you know about him? All I really know is he was kind of part of the Chelsea revolution, and he identified players such as Mo Salah, Kevin De Bruyne, and a few others. But what do you know about Michael Emanuelo? Do you know, is that something that is close, not close? Are there other names in the mix? What's your know on that, Ben?
So Michael Emanuelo is the front runner, and I would also say historically has been the front runner. And it's kind of important people understand that when the ownership group and PIF in particular first took meetings about who they were going to bring into the football club, it was obviously much earlier in the takeover saga. And Michael Emanuelo has been over to Saudi Arabia, that's true. And he's had a tour of the kind of sporting facilities over there. And he's been kind of shown the sports strategy on the ground in Saudi Arabia, which broader than Newcastle will include using NEOM, which is a kind of sporting city where the hope is that they're going to open some sports science facilities very similar to the ones in Qatar. And they're going to be hosting various high profile sports. And then PIF, as part of Vision 2030, would like to open sports facilities, not just in football, to kind of coach grassroots talent to both create jobs and also obviously unearth Saudi Arabian talent. Now that actually has more of a focus on Olympic sports to try and up the medal count there, but will extend naturally to football and could well have a direct brand affiliation to Newcastle United, i.e. it might end up being a Newcastle soccer school. So when Emanuelo went over there, he was kind of given the Vision 2030 sports strategy, and his first conversations over 7-8 months ago now were more around coming in and having say and control over the new manager, whereas now it's kind of flipped, and whoever they appoint as director of football won't have had that much say and won't have been directly part of the interview process to appoint Steve Bruce's replacement. So even though Emanuelo's a fan of Eddie Howe, it's not like he's actually had the choice to go through the candidates. And I think that it can work because he's a fan of Howe, but in an ideal world, you'd have lined up your director of football first and then your manager, brought in the manager. So,
but I think he does like his style, though, from what I've read, certainly this evening, trying to do a little bit of research before we came on. I think he is quite keen on Howe's style and how he plays. So obviously, if he does get the job, and again, I've read tonight that, you know, if Newcastle were to get Michael Emanuelo, it would be seen as quite a coup in the football world if we were to get a hold of him.
Yeah, it would be a coup. I mean, let's not forget, as you said, what he did at Chelsea, but also he had a similar position at AS Monaco as well, who are renowned for their recruitment and their development of young talent too. And it doesn't matter so much about whether he is or isn't a fan of Howe, because his job will be to work above Howe in finding the right short, medium and long-term names to first get Newcastle out of trouble and then have them challenging for Europe. So there'll be no real concerns about the direct relationship between Howe, who's very affable. I mean, I've had quite a bit to do with Eddie Howe over the last 7 or 8 years, and I've spent a fair amount of time with him when he used to take his Bournemouth side out to Dubai for warm weather training. And the thing to get about Howe is that he's adaptable. So he's the right personality as well as the right manager. So whoever comes in as director of football won't have a problem developing a relationship with him. He's not going to be throwing diva fits, his toys out the pram. He's not going to be working outside of the remit that he's been employed on. And the ownership group have been quite clever in that respect. You know, they've not brought in a manager and then months later dumped a new structure on them. They've been very clear with all of the managerial candidates that this is the structure. This is how it's going to work. This is where the say comes from. This is what PIF are going to say. This is the day-to-day management from the minority owners. And then your role and the manager's role, or the director of football's role and the manager's role, will be quite rigid. And I think they'll follow a model reasonably similar eventually to Liverpool, who have got a kind of transfer committee. And Klopp has some say, and some would say Klopp still has final say. But what you're doing is you're protecting the foundations and the infrastructure of the club by having fixed backroom staff that are not directly affiliated to your coaching staff. So then if Howe doesn't work after 3 months, if Newcastle go down, if Newcastle do so well that they're like, well, actually now we want someone that can win us the Champions League, and Howe's taken us as far as we can go. You're not starting from scratch again, because everything that you need to progress as a club over 3 to 5 years, let's say, comes from your director of football, comes from your CEO, and ultimately comes from your ownership group. And they sort of have more of a fixed tenure than potentially the manager. So I think they'd be the right fit. I know they've looked at other candidates as well. Overmars was one of the other prominent names that they certainly held talks with. But I don't think they saw him as quite the right fit, especially if Ten Hag wasn't the manager to kind of accompany him. And Frank McParland is certainly another name, as I understand it, that they've spoken to as well. But Emanilo has been the long-term frontrunner, particularly from PIF, which is ultimately why he went to Saudi Arabia. I mean, why do people have to go to Saudi Arabia to have negotiations when Yasser Al-Rumayyan has been regularly in London and spends a lot of his time in America as well? And then the Rubin brothers and Amanda Staveley are both obviously in the Newcastle area. So when someone's flown out to Saudi Arabia, you know it's more a stunt to kind of wine them, or not really wine them in Saudi Arabia, but wine them in the loosest possible sense, dine them and kind of show off the potential of the club. It's almost like schmoozing rather than just kind of an ad hoc business meeting. So if it gets that far and they make the journey, you know that they're a serious contender. So I would expect Emanilo, if they can agree terms, to be the sporting director now. And I think that Newcastle will be in a position to make an announcement on that particular position by the end of the international break.
Okay, interesting. We will see what happens. Just on PIF, I know some people have been asking questions. As the rebuild of the club takes place and, you know, the consortium get their feet under the table as such, can we expect to hear more from PIF as an ownership, or will the majority of what's said and done in the day-to-day predominantly be done by Amanda Staveley and kind of PCP? Or do you think we will see more and hear more from PIF?
No, I don't think we'll hear a great deal from PIF. And I think when we do, it will be about Newcastle as a brand, not as a football club. So naturally, Yasser Al-Rumayyan in particular does do a lot of media outside of the sports sector. And eventually he's going to be directly questioned on the football club rather than just being able to write an open letter or making pre-prepared statements. And then he'll have to answer. And he'll answer when, for example, Newcastle United visits Saudi Arabia, or he's talking about wider brand or commercial goals, because that's a kind of safer space. It also plays into his area of expertise. But Abramovich doesn't do anything at Chelsea. The ownership group at Manchester City barely do any press. And the Sheikh, the main owner, I don't think has done a single interview since taking over. So it's not kind of atypical for a rich foreign investor to be quite distant from the PR of the football club. That, by the way, doesn't mean that Yasser or PIF are distant from the day-to-day running of the football club. It just means that they don't choose to be the face of the football club. And at the moment, that is Amanda Staveley, and I expect that to continue. And it's natural now that there's a distance because, let's be honest, they know if you put me in front of them, if you put other journalists in front of them, we're going to ask them about the difficult aspects of what really happened. Why did the takeover suddenly happen? Are you concerned about Saudi Arabia's human rights record? And we're fully entitled to push these different angles, because the downside of PIF is that they wear multiple hats. So if he's talking at a climate change conference and someone's allowed to ask him about Newcastle United, then if he's talking about Newcastle United, why can't someone ask him about something that isn't about Newcastle United directly, such as human rights or piracy? And that is just the nature, from experience of living and working in the Middle East, of these names, that they're very difficult to get FaceTime with. So you have to be very clever about where you get them, and then when you get in front of them, what you ask them. But they're also very well prepared to kind of fob off the issue, and they're also very protected by their entourages. And it may never die down, of course, unless Saudi Arabia takes positive steps to rectify a range of issues far broader than Newcastle United, there's always going to be in-points that are topical to ask these names about. And people will naturally feel like a close ally of MBS historically in Yasser Al-Rumayyan is a voice for the government or a voice for MBS, whether he's wearing a Newcastle shirt at a game or whether he's talking in a different sector. And, fans will understand that, because, as I said before, if I grab Yasser Al-Rumayyan at a government event and I ask him if he's going to sign Mbappe, I'll be heralded as a hero for getting that question into him. But if a human rights lawyer asks him a question at a game about something nothing to do with the game, they'll be slammed for being inappropriate. But it works both ways because the access is so limited. So I sense that PIF are going to be very quiet and silent as far as the PR game for now. And when they do speak, they're going to go to very trusted journalists that they know are going to give them a reasonably soft interview. And maybe further down the line, as Newcastle develops and things calm down around the takeover, they'll start talking. But I actually think that Yasser, if he is to talk, might bypass us, much to our disdain, and he might go straight to the fans if he does actually do anything, which I think would be a very wise thing. If you're not going to engage with the media, stop with these pre-prepared statements, because it doesn't add that much, and start engaging directly with the supporter groups, because then at least the fans feel that there is a voice behind 80% of their football club, rather than just a name and an organisation. I'll be annoyed if they do that, because I feel like we should be entitled to scrutinise them. But if they're going to speak, at least speak to somebody rather than nobody.
Yeah, I think as fans, there's since the takeover and obviously pre-takeover, we've seen demonstrations at Crystal Palace. That seems to kind of, to be fair, have really been the only ground that we've seen some format of a thing. And I suppose as Newcastle fans, certainly from my perspective, and I don't speak on behalf of the fan base at all, or anybody that watches us on Loaded. For me, I get all of the other things that are intertwined with Saudi Arabia, but for me, it's purely about the football and the football club. And I think sometimes it's very hard, media-wise, certainly post-takeover, there's probably been a lot that has been thrown at Newcastle United fans as a fan base that probably shouldn't be, and probably wasn't warranted. But I think, unfortunately, as you said, kind of on some of the prior shows, it kind of comes with the territory and the turf of Saudi Arabia and other bits. I was going to talk a little bit about, obviously, we kind of started on PIF there, and I was going to talk a little bit about PIF and this link to Inter and where their focuses were going to be. But James Douglas just kind of jotted my head there with a question about sponsorship. And I suppose kind of as we are coming up to the hour, and I know I normally try not to keep you too long, I'm interested just to get your view on the meeting that the Premier League had when they have kind of put this slight change on how some of the sponsorship deals work. I suppose if you look at the vote as a Newcastle fan and Manchester City who abstained, you would kind of look at it and go, okay, is this a bit of a sucker punch? We got the takeover, but now we can't have Aramco sponsoring our shirts for 300 million. because the deal has to be of a fair value for what the sponsorship is. So what's your view and what was your opinion when that meeting took place, and that kind of temporary change has happened? Why do you think that was? Do you think it was aimed at stopping Newcastle going on a bit of a spending spree and getting the 300 million shirt sponsor, or why that change?
It is an unfair question with minutes to go because it's complicated.
I don't know why I asked that.
In-depth answers.
We
could have spent an hour on this, but I'll try and spend a minute or two maximum. So the meeting itself was unfair because it was more of a protest, and it clearly was triggered by the Newcastle takeover and obviously factors in Manchester City as well. And in essence, what the Premier League clubs want, specifically around what's called related party trades, is fair market value. And, that can apply to any deal, but a related party trade, i.e. in layman's terms, a deal with someone you've got a relationship with or a link to, is more susceptible to commercial fraud used very loosely, because of course you can bump up the deal in any way, shape or form because you've got ins and relationships with the party. And under financial fair play, UEFA can scrutinise those deals. And if you list it as a related party trade, then anyone that wants to question that or delve into that at UEFA can do that. And then simultaneous to that, the Premier League can have their own rules at their level for their league. So the desire of the clubs to get a fair market price is absolutely fair. But the point here is that you can't just put a block on any related party trades until you work out a plan, because that looks petty and it looks like a form of protest. Because the other 18 clubs don't need to be leading on this and shouldn't be leading on this, because how are they going to know what's fair market value? They've got no intel into Newcastle or Manchester City. They're not going to be the ones looking into the deal. So they shouldn't be raising it. The Premier League and ultimately UEFA should be leading on this, and clubs should be coming together and saying, how can we ensure that deals are judged in terms of their market value? And the best way of doing that is to use cold, hard data, rather than let the clubs define why the deal is fair market value, rather than allowing the clubs just to provide their non-quantifiable reasons for why a deal over 5 years is ultimately within financial fair play. We should be looking at the time of the deal at cold, hard data and where the market is as the time the deal was done, where it's heading towards, what the club are pulling in, what the company are investing and why. And that can ultimately be delved into on spreadsheets if the parties behind the deal are prepared to share that data, preferably to an independent body. And it has nothing to do with the other 18 clubs. So what they're aspiring for, they've always been aspiring for, and they have no real right to put a block on any business in this area until the rules are changed. But the reassuring thing for Newcastle, Manchester City as well, is that the block is entirely anti-competitive and illegal. And it's only there because the clubs have decided to put an embargo until they come up with a solution. And I don't see it being extended any further now. And you can't actually stop a deal. All you can do is have a protest against a deal. And even if during the block, Newcastle United do a deal, it can't be stopped legally.
Yeah. Okay.
So the block is almost hypothetical, because Newcastle United is still going away and fostering deals. And as soon as the block is lifted, they'll complete their deal. And then if anyone's got a problem with it, they'll have to take it up with the Premier League and UEFA in retrospect. And if it's a club that's got a problem with it, they'll have zero information about the financials of the deal. And therefore, they're highly unlikely to be able to directly dispute it. and it will again fall to the Premier League and UEFA as per the old system. So it's almost a power move. It's not going to lead to anything. It's not going to derail any existing deals. Newcastle have got very little to worry about. But generally and more broadly, fair market value in football does need addressing. And the best way of doing that is for all of the clubs led by the Premier League and ultimately UEFA across all of European football. They all need to have buy-in, to have an independent regulator to look at these deals. Because if Newcastle do a deal in Saudi Arabia for $1 trillion, that market's very different to North America, where Manchester United are used to dealing, or Asia, where Liverpool do a lot of business. So it needs more finesse. Like, fair market value isn't just X or Y. It depends on all kinds of things, like
local trade, location, yeah.
Industry is investing, how long's it for, what the benefit is, and so on. So there can be all kinds of finesse. And obviously, if Newcastle United are owned by Saudi Arabia and do business in Saudi Arabia, and it's aired across Saudi Arabia, and they visit Saudi Arabia, and they tie in with Vision 2030, each of these creeps the value up. And that is fair market value. But what we don't want is backhanders. And that's prevalent across too much of football. So what we don't want is PIF working their PIF network to find a sponsor for Newcastle United, knowing that sponsor will overpay. What we don't want is PIF taking money out one aspect of their business because they happen to own, say, Neom, who could sponsor Newcastle United, and then transferring that money into the football club, because there's no policing over that. That's all internal. So there definitely has to be scrutiny from an independent regulator, but it's not for the clubs to be bullish and confrontational about this to try and get us there.
Okay. There you go. So you heard it there. Ben says we've got a deal for $1 trillion coming our way, so we should be good.
And also, before we maybe talk about Inter, I'm going to do the opposite of that answer. And I'm going to, in one word or two, just respond to some of the comments that I've seen. So we acknowledge some of the other questions and also criticism of my jumper as well. And just kind of scroll.
I haven't said nothing about your jumper now.
I like the one that says the wall behind me looks a bit like a protest as well. That was a good comment. I'm just going to see if I can actually find some of the questions rather than just the abuse. But I think
somebody did say, "Is that a Banksy behind you?" As well. It was a good one that I saw as well.
It wasn't there when the broadcast started, and then it was when the broadcast finished. So Banksy's been in whilst I've been roaming on and on. Mike's has great clothing and quality, so I'm going to take that one as a compliment. There's been too many comments though for me to actually find any of the questions, but I think that one or two people were asking me from memory whether or not I thought that Newcastle were going to make any other staffing movements during the international break other than a director of football. And I think the
answer in there somewhere.
Yes. I think that we'll have some other senior appointments coming in the backroom staff. I think that a player liaison might be appointed. I think that a CEO will take a little bit longer, but watch this space basically on all of the back office staff. And then someone had asked whether Newcastle were going to go to Saudi Arabia. Yes, is the answer to that. So interestingly, PSG are going to Saudi Arabia in January to play against a Al Hilal Al Nasser 11 managed by Arsene Wenger. And it's part of an entertainment festival of which football is one aspect. And Newcastle in 2023 will be earmarked to be a part of that. And then I do think that they'll go over in the pre-season as well to play a match, possibly against the Saudi Arabian football team. So it might be a little bit atypical because it might be something that doesn't get put in the summer pre-season, but gets put in the Qatar 2022 international break.
Yeah, kind of build up.
2-3 weeks before the World Cup, Newcastle might play a warm-up game against the Saudi national team. So look out for that one as well. It could be in Saudi Arabia, but it might also be in their warm-up camp. I think Saudi Arabia will stay in Saudi Arabia and fly into Doha, but they might use some of the Doha facilities as well. And one of the trade-offs, it's too far away to be definitive on this, but one of the trade-offs may be that Newcastle come over to Doha and Saudi Arabia and PSG are involved. So you might sort of see like a mini tournament at some point before the World Cup. So look out for that one as well. And I think those were the main questions that I'd seen in the chat.
Okay, very good. Well, we are an hour in, and I was going to ask you about PIF, but I think we've kind of run towards time. So what I do want to do is I just want to talk about everything else that's kind of going on. I know that Daz is in the chat. I've seen him. So I will just give a shout out to say that Loaded Mag live line is back on tomorrow night at 7:30. You'll see it on Twitter. Myself, Daz, Chris, and the lads will be on tomorrow night. There'll be a link in that for StreamYard. If you want to come on and have a chat about Eddie Howe, about Ben's show tonight, you want to talk about what's going on, you want to talk about the team, you want to talk about what's next, hit the link up, join the show tomorrow night, come on to StreamYard Live. We'll bring you on. Normally the likes of Carl and a few of the others come on every week. Dunhill and a lot of the viewers, our regulars, come on. We all have a chat. We bring people on, have your 5-10 minutes and kind of have a chat about all things Newcastle. So that is tomorrow night. Daz will kill me if I don't say this. So obviously we have come a long way over the last kind of 6 months. One of the fastest growing channels and sets of shows out there in the NUFC world. So we kind of had set ourselves a target of hitting 1K subs by Christmas. We blitzed that. I think we're approaching 1.4K at the moment. So we do want to try and get to 2K. So if you haven't subscribed, go to YouTube, youtube.com/c/loadedhq. And if you like the content, you like listening to people like Ben, who comes on and gives up his time to come on for an hour and chat with me and with the guys to enable us to keep doing that and bringing you people like Ben, like Warren Barton, like some of the guys that we've had on, Alistair McGowan and some others we've got coming up. Just hit the sub button. It is free. You can click and hit subscribe. So Ben, thank you very much, as always, sir, for coming on and spending an hour with myself. Always love to chat. And I will say to people that watch, to be fair, you always come back, you always answer a DM, and you have, as always, been very, very fair to us and come on and spent your hour on a Monday evening with us, as always. So I thank you very much for your time, and I've enjoyed chatting to you yet again, mate.
Final correction, which is in breaking news. Mike says he wasn't complimenting my clothing. He was talking about the 1892. So that's going to set me off all sad now, unfortunately, because we finished with an insult about what he says is my chamois clothing, which is disappointing. By the way, Gary just says it's the interlink a load of rubbish. And I wouldn't quite go that strong, but in essence, for the purpose of a 5-second answer, I don't think that they're going to be in by the end of the year. And as I've said on Twitter, if you want to read in a bit more detail, they kind of spoke before Newcastle was done. So they will want to build a group of teams, but I don't see them like buying into tomorrow or before the year is out or impacting Newcastle in any way. So, you know, fans asking these questions from Newcastle don't really care about the ins and the outs. I've got a whole range of inter-Geordies, if you like, that are giving me the full treatment that I got from the Newcastle fans about a year ago now, but luckily I don't understand Italian. So when they're calling me Stephen Merchant, I don't even understand it, which is lucky. But in essence, from a Newcastle point of view, the short and easy answer is it's absolutely no concern to Newcastle United.
Yeah, I've read a few bits today, and there is, and it's probably another show's worth to talk about Sunning and a few other things. You know, the price in supposedly of Inter is 1 billion. It's a lot of money when you consider what Newcastle was sold for to PIF and a consortium, and there's a whole heap that goes around it. But listen, maybe that's gives us an opportunity at some point to bring Ben back on for a bit of a separate chat, another catch up, and maybe for those that just like football, we can maybe chat a bit about Inter and let's see how Eddie Howe does on his first few games. So we will close off there. Thanks to everybody who's been watching. It's been a really good show. I do always enjoy having Ben on, and as I said, he always takes time to answer and come back, and really enjoyed it. So Ben, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll drop you a message and we will chat again soon, mate.
Cheers. Talk soon. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks very much. Thanks everybody for watching, and we shall talk to you later on. Thanks and good night.